Hi, thank you for watching Yoga with Elia. This is Elia, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about headstand, Sirsasana. Now, we all know what headstand is, and some of us maybe even practice it frequently or even daily. And compared to other inversions and compared to other arm balances, headstands are probably one of the easiest. Once you get through the initial coordination and balance etiquette of being upside down, it's fairly easy to hold and it's not that advanced to be able to balance in it. But when we think about what's easy to do in a posture, it's not always the case that just because something is easy also means that it's safe or it's optimal to do. So, in analyzing the safety of any posture, we have to analyze, well, what is doing the posture? So, it's the body. And when we think about headstand, when we stand the entire weight of the body on the head, the force, the weight of the entire body that is now upside down is being borne on the neck. And so we have to understand a few things about the neck, the cervical spine, and this is where we'll need our lovely spinal model. So luckily I have mine here with me. And as I've discussed in other videos, and as I've discussed online, and as we already probably know, the spine has two major curves. It has a kyphosis and it has a lordosis. And then different sections of your spine naturally have to have a certain kind of curve in order to function best. So the spine, that's just kind of a footnote, isn't technically a straight line. It's designed to be in basically a S curve, where here the neck is in a slight lordosis, the thoracic spine is at a kyphosis, and the lumbar spine is again in a lordosis. So it kind of zigzags that way all the way up and down, which allows it to absorb the shock of the body when we're walking, standing, jumping, and whatever it is that we do. But looking at the spine, and if you see this up close, you see that the lumbar spine has big, thick vertebra and likewise big, thick discs. And as you ascend the spine, what you see is that by the time we get to the 7 cervical vertebra and disc, what you end up having is a much, much smaller vertebra and a very, very thin disc. And the reason that I bring this up is because discs are actually supposed to be shock absorbent. And so whenever any kind of forces, when any kind of impact occurs on the spine, the thicker the discs, the more protective it can be from the associated forces. And it makes sense that our lumbar spine has thicker discs because it has to bear the weight of the entire body that's above the lumbar spine. But when it comes to the cervical spine, your neck, there's not much weight that you have to hold up above that. It's just the weight of your head, and it's 10 to 13 pounds on average. And so the neck has evolved to just be, by default, smaller, thinner in both its vertebra and its discs. What that means for us mechanically is that it is easier to compress the discs. It doesn't take as much force to compress these discs as it does to compress the low back. And again, I say that because of how the spine evolved, how the lower back evolved to hold the entire weight of the body that's above, but the neck only evolved to support the weight of the head. So it would be a waste of resources if we developed with big, thick neck vertebra when we didn't actually need it. But so when we practice yoga, what we do is we flip the body upside down, and now we make the lower back, so that point in the body that bears all of the weight of the body above it, we bear that on the neck. So where the lower back becomes now the upper end of the spine becomes the lower end. And so if we sit our body weight on top of the neck, which it's not evolved for, this can be a big risk. And this does oftentimes people incur a lot of injury from practicing inversions, let's say prematurely. And it's not bad to practice headstand, but what we have to understand is we have to condition the neck. We have to condition the vertebra of the neck in order to be able to support the entire weight of the body when we're upside down. And this does happen, and the thing is, we have to learn how to be patient enough with our headstands to allow the neck vertebra to adapt to the new load that's being placed on it. And the bones, they do actually adapt. And they adapt through a certain kind of force, through a certain kind of response, generally referred to as Wolff's Law. Now, basically what Wolff's Law states is that whenever we exert any kind of force on bone tissue, the body responds to that force by avenue of mechanotransduction, by avenue of eliciting certain chemical responses that then produce and lay down more bone tissue because of the pressures put on it. And this is how we have such things as bone spurs, heel spurs, and it's also how we start to get fragility in our bones via something like osteoporosis. If we don't have enough pressure on the bones, and if we live a sedentary lifestyle, then our body and our biology doesn't have any good reason to lay down more bone tissue, and so we actually become more fragile in our bones if we don't load them. So it's important to load the bones, but there's a big difference between loading and overloading. So we have to be able to condition the neck. And this brings me to the two variations of headstand, the two most popular variations of headstand. One is the classical headstand position, where your arms are in this position, and the other one is the tripod headstand. And I think most of you watching this will probably know what I'm talking about already, but if we take a closer look at what the differences are between tripod and the classical headstand, we will start to get a way better idea on what is safest and most optimal for our cervical spine. Okay, so let's look at the first one, and this is actually the most common practiced version of headstand that I see practiced, which is tripod. So I'm going to set it up and turn around so that I could still see you. You could still see me. You place your hands in tripod diagonally out to the sides. You want to make sure that the elbows stay above the wrists, fingers facing towards the head. Not exactly towards the face, but in the direction that your head is. And then we just lift the legs up, and then we maintain, really, the balance just by using the arms. So the hands are not there to offload any weight of the body from the neck. The hands are there to simply make sure that I don't fall over to the side or back forward onto my feet. Now, what we have to understand about that, as I was showing previously with the spine model, is because the hands are not offloading all of the pressure and the weight of the body from the neck ends up incurring all of our body weight, which, as we saw, it is not designed for. It has not evolved for it. And so if we don't take time, if we don't take at least a couple of years with regular headstand practice to just condition the neck, we're actually prematurely rushing ourselves into tripod headstand. Now, it's easier to do it that way because by comparison to the classical one, right, if you were looking from the bottom of the floor, this is what you would see. You'd see the head and the hands here. So technically, the base is itself a lot wider and a lot bigger. And a bigger base means more stability by comparison to this, to the classical position of headstand. And what you have in the classical position of headstand that is so much more superior as far as its safety and function and protection of the neck goes is you're sharing the weight of the body between the elbows, forearms, and outer wrists, as well as the head. And the way that is actually instructed to begin our headstand practice is to try to press so firmly into the floor with the arms, part of which is your shoulder muscles and your shoulder mechanics, that you actually don't have to incur all of the weight of the body on the neck. And that's very important because, again, we have to look out for the spine. So there's a safety issue here at stake. But we also have to understand that even though a tripod headstand is easier, The trade-off that we get with it is that there's a lot more at stake and there's a lot more at risk. Now, you might be wondering, I've been doing yoga for a couple of years. All I really practice is tripod headstands. I don't feel anything wrong. I don't feel any neck pain. So why does this even apply to me? And that's a fair question. And how I would answer that, and how I do answer that, is I try to remind people that when something is easy and something doesn't currently hurt, it doesn't mean that there isn't underlying damage that's occurring. Now, sure, the damage might be very incremental. It might be negligible as far as what you actually feel subjectively. But remember, our yoga practice is there for a lifetime. And I've been around a lot of senior teachers. I've been mentored by physical therapists and chiropractors. And what I've seen in many senior teachers is a lot of degeneration in the neck, especially the hips and the neck. But the hips are a different story out of the scope of this tutorial. And what I've heard from my mentors is as the popularity of yoga has grown, the patients that they get that are yogis, yoga students, has actually increased. And many of those patients come in for neck troubles, for neck pains, or even for neck arthritis. And so not all damage is going to be so traumatic that it's immediately obvious. Some damage can be so slight and so minimally obvious that you don't notice it, but it accrues over time. And if you have a consistent practice for 5, 10, even 20 years or more, slow little increments of damage become a big deal. And if you find out 20 years later that you've developed bone spurs in your neck, you develop osteophytes, and you slowly created a condition of arthritis in the neck, it's too late at that point to turn back the clock and get back to where your neck was 20 years previously when you started. So we have to watch out for the neck. And this is why the classical Sirsasana headstand position is so much more superior, because not only does it help us offload the pressure of the body weight on the neck, but it actually helps introduce a different and a more sophisticated skill into the arms and shoulders because of the job and the role that they have to play. So let's take a little bit of a closer look on what makes classical headstand a little bit safer and how to do it even more effectively. So what is less frequently taught, and unless you go to a proper Iyengar yoga class, almost isn't taught at all, is the exact way to set up the hands for headstand. And usually what I've seen is we're told to just interlace the fingers, place the back of the head in the hands, and then basically jump up and good luck. Now we have to exercise a little bit more care. And there's a couple of points about how to set up the hands so that we can better bear the weight of the whole body on the forearms so that the neck doesn't have to bear the weight. Now, the first point to look at is exactly how we interlace the fingers. It's important that when you interlace the fingers, you interlace them firmly and strongly, not just when you're in headstand, but when you're doing anything. Because if you're going to do anything, you might as well do it as close to 100% as possible, or not do it at all. Because not doing it to the best of your ability is going to predispose you to injury and risk. So interlacing the fingers for headstand specifically means taking the webbings of your fingers here all the way deeply into each other. So you can't actually slide your hands any further than what those webbings allow. The second point is, as you interlace in the entire duration of your headstand, you have to make sure that you're pressing the tips of the fingers like this firmly against the backs of the hands. That will allow more strength and mechanical integrity of your arms in your hands, because any integrity that you build up in your hands starts to feed the integrity of function also in your shoulders, which, as we know now, we clearly need a lot of for headstand. So you get your fingers knit tight, you press the tips of your fingers into the backs of the hands, and then you want to look at the pinkies. Now, because you're setting the weight of your body on this edge of your arm and your hand, you want to make sure that that plane is even. So if you have like this, you have one pinky below the other, you're creating an uneven foundation because as you can see, one hand is closer to the ground, the outer edge, than the other hand. So what you actually want to do, and this is what Roger Cole teaches, is you fold one pinky inside of the other. So you create a same even plane when you place your arms down. That way you can exert even force through both arms and get the same symmetrical result going up the body from there. Now, the last point is once you get this, how far do you set your elbows? And what plays into this is the wrists, because depending on the size of your head, if you have to make a lot of room for your head with your hands, you have to set your elbows wider. But you can't set your elbows too wide because eventually if you end up setting your hands in this position on the floor, then it's not really a headstand. It's not really the same classical headstand. It comes back being closer to tripod. So you want to make sure that the line right here from the knuckles to the elbows is one straight, simple plane. So you have to determine how wide to separate your hands when you set your head down so that the width and the distance between your elbows doesn't collapse your wrist. Because if I spread my elbows too wide, the wrist kind of collapse in like this. And if I set my elbows too narrow, the wrists drop out. In either case, they lose power, they lose strength, they lose competence and integrity. So we don't actually want to open up the hands and just hold the back of the head like some kind of a breadbasket. You can actually keep your hands more closed, and the only contact point to the back of your head that's necessary is right here. These 2 points of the base of your palm, which is the same points where when you're placing your hands on the floor, you're distributing the weight between those two. You never want to just smash the center of your palm into the floor when you're bearing weight on the hands. So in the same way, you don't actually need your head to touch the center of your palm. So if you were looking at me again from the ground, I'm only going to open up my hands just enough so that the sides of my skull contact these 2 points perfectly. Okay, and you can see that when I adjust the width of my elbows, there's a point where the straight line from the knuckles to the elbows is sustained. So I spread my hands about this wide, I support the back of my head, and then just by keeping the elbows at about this distance, I ensure that I have pretty straight lines from the elbows to the knuckles. Now, when it comes to actually placing your body weight on the floor, you're going to make sure that you're pressing firmly with your fingertips. So, and especially these 2 fingertips, the index and middle fingers, because as you press them into the backs of the palms, it's going to help you get this ulnar area of your outer wrists down flat, which is going to give you a lot more mechanical ability. So I press the outer wrist down, make sure my pinkies are folded into each other, keep the fingertips squeezed, and when you place your arms down, as you look at them, you can already see. If you set your elbows wider, you have a kink in your wrist. If you set your elbows too narrow, you have another kink in the wrist, nor any room for your head. So you set your head down, and when you set your head down, again, remember, even if your head isn't touching this outer edge of your palm, well, technically it's the inner edge, but it's the edge that's in contact with the ground. As long as your head is touching this nice thick pad of your thumb, that's all that really counts. So I set my hands, and when you set the top of your head down, really study that it's the top of your head, because if you're more towards the back of the head, it's going to force you, if you can tell, to round your neck too much. If you're too much towards the hairline, it's going to extend your neck too far the opposite direction. So you want to be straight on the top of your head. And one way you can kind of get used to that, put a book on your head and stand upright. And where the book is in most balance, when it's horizontal, it'll be in contact with a specific part of your skull, and that you will know to be that perfect top of the head point. So from there, you set your hands down, and before you lift your legs up, I would just encourage to, again, reassert the way that you're pressing your fingertips into the backs of the palms. Keep your outer wrist down. Keep firm contact between those pads of your thumbs and your skull, and then you just lift your legs, and away you go. Now, over time, as you develop your literacy, your fluency for doing headstands, you'll be able to take some of that effort out of the arms and sustain more of it on your head. But as you're learning this, it's very important that once you're in headstand, that you try to press your arms, your forearms down like this the whole time, so that you place less weight on the head, so there's less risk on the neck. One thing that I would encourage is that if you're not yet sure on whether you're interacting with your arms and your shoulders the correct way or the effective way to be able to have minimal weight on the neck, is that when you set yourself up, you can just practice trying to lift your head before your legs even have to come off the floor. So if I set myself up, I can still keep my feet on the floor, as you can see. And you can just practice pressing down with your forearms, lifting the head off the floor, and carefully coming down. Really emphasize the softness of when you actually come down. And as you get used to this movement, pressing up, coming back down, or maybe even pressing up and just staying up, as you get used to that, you're actually starting to kind of program into your arms, shoulders, and your hands on how to do this even in real time within the headstand. Okay. So that was our quick little tutorial, a couple of little tips and tricks on headstand and its two variations. And I don't want to have anybody walk away from watching this video with any kind of fear of doing headstand. What I want to just promote is caution to doing tripod headstand, especially if you haven't had enough time in your yoga practice to build up the fortitude of your neck in order to do it safely, because not every class is going to ask you how long you've practiced and how long you've been practicing headstand even before jumping into it or before taking their classes. And it is fun, so I don't want to take any fun away from anybody, because tripod headstand lends itself to other variations that we can come down into and then back up to the headstand. And so those things are very novel, they are very exciting, and they actually do help to build a lot of body awareness. They do produce a certain kind of revivifying effect on the system, but there's no reason that we need to compromise safety for it. I think that if we just remember that yoga is there to sustain through our life. It's not there just for a couple of years to keep us entertained until we find something better to do. This is really the essence of preserving your health, both structurally and functionally. And in order to do that, we just have to know where our practice is, what our strengths and our weaknesses are, and proceed accordingly. Now, I don't want to discourage anybody from doing inversions, because inversions are glorious. They are very important. And I've taught chair version of headstand, so you can always look up tutorials on how to do chair headstand. I've written about it on my blog. You can read that. So if you don't even want to do regular headstand, you can definitely do the tripod headstand and still receive the benefits of inversions. You can do it with a yoga wall that I prefer, that I offer. And inversions have an effect that not many other postures do. When we flip ourselves upside down, we help our heart, we help our cardiovascular system with venous blood return. We also help to flush out a lot of the blood that tends to stagnate at the base of our lungs. When it does that, it doesn't allow air to penetrate the bottom aspects of the lungs, and so we mainly receive oxygenation in the top edge, in the top of our lungs and the respiratory system. It has an effect on our lymphatic system. You know, our lymphatic system is basically like our sewage system. And so if that tissue, if that fluid of the lymph gets stagnant, then that again consigns us to different kinds of dangers and toxicity and low immunity, which in our day and age, we know that we can't afford. When we flip the body upside down and set it back upright, we help to promote the circulation of all fluids, which also includes cerebrospinal fluid, which you can just basically think is the blood, the lifeblood of your nervous system. It is housed between your brain and your spine, and it circulates between the brain and the spine. And there's been a researcher, he actually wrote The Anatomy of Hatha Yoga, David Coulter. He actually taught that practicing inversions allows the ventricles in the brain, there's little spaces inside of our brain where the cerebrospinal is produced, it allows that area to be fleshed out a little bit more, because our cerebrospinal fluid is integral to the way our nervous system works. Again, it carries nutrients towards the nerve cells and waste products away. So inversions are indispensable from what we see to health, to function, and even to vivid happiness, embodied physiological, physical happiness. So I hope that this video provided you with some helpful techniques. So please practice safely, practice responsibly, take your time, and I will see you in future videos. Thank you for watching.